For sale, baby shoes, never worn. This short story, and yes, that's the entire story, is perhaps the most famous example of what we call flash fiction. It's often attributed to Hemingway. I'm personally not convinced that he actually wrote it, but regardless of who the author is, or whether it was a one-off stroke of genius, it is in fact great writing. It gives a lot of information, it can cause strong emotions in the reader, and it is 6 words long. Hey guys, I'm Jana, welcome to this video. Today we're going to discuss word count, productivity, quality, how those things relate to one another and how they are different, and how our perception of them affects our mental state and our confidence as writers. Before we even begin, I want to make it clear that this is not an attack on anyone who's doing writing experiments or trying to hit large word count goals or making YouTube videos about that. If that's working for you, then great. Everyone's writing process is different and it's entirely up to you. So if what I'm going to say next doesn't apply to you, then it doesn't apply to you. The point of this video is just to make you question if you should change something about the way you do things to make yourself happier and to make your writing better. But it's kind of like going to the doctors for your annual exam. You might find out that nothing's wrong and you can keep going the way you're going. However, there is a strong trend, especially on authortube, and it's the I typed a bajillion words trend. Or with Camp NaNoWriMo July coming up, it's the I plan on writing 3 complete novels by the end of camp trend. Obviously I'm slightly exaggerating, but only slightly, because I've seen some truly insane camp goals. Now, like any trend, it isn't necessarily good or bad in itself. How it affects you as a writer is up to you, really. Writing challenges and goals and YouTube videos about them are super entertaining. They make for great YouTube content. I watch them, I enjoy them. They can also be motivating and get you in the mood for writing. But there are a few things to consider. Good YouTube content does not necessarily equal good writing practices. Now, I'm not saying that it necessarily equals bad writing practices. It's just that the two things are separate, and we should always remember that. Because however transparent authortubers try to be about their process and how they're feeling and everything about their writing, YouTube is still not real life. It's still edited, it's still curated in some way, and some of the content is still motivated by are people going to want to watch this. If nothing else, content that is popular to watch floats to the top, creating the illusion that there is a certain way of doing things and that's the only right way to do them. Because when I look at my suggestions on YouTube, there's a whole bunch of writing experiments and high word count goals and challenges and that sort of thing. And that kind of gets in your head and makes you think that if you're not writing at least 5,000 words per day, then what are you doing with your life? So many of you seem to think that writing 50,000 words in a month is actually something normal and that you should be able to do that every month or almost every month, and not that it's something that you could maybe possibly attempt once a year, and even then that's a very high word count goal to hit in 1 month, because life happens. Even if writing is your only job, life happens. You can't eat and breathe words the entire time and your brain gets tired. But many of you think that should be completely possible. And then looking at people's word count goals for Camp NaNoWriMo, a lot of people have goals that are even higher than that. And I constantly see people say things like, oh, you know, I've never managed to win Camp NaNoWriMo. And then what was your word count? Well, it was 60,000 words, or it was 75,000 words. 75,000 words in a month? Well, no kidding, you never won Camp NaNoWriMo. I mean, maybe some people can, but are you even sure that's what you want to do? Is that actually something that helps your writing? Or are you only setting that goal because you feel like you're falling behind because everybody else is throwing out these huge word count goals? Is it peer pressure? Again, I'm not saying that everyone is wrong to do this. For a handful of people, this maybe actually works. And maybe you, exactly you who are watching this video right now, are the exception and you have a massive word count goal, but that's fine. You can totally do it. You can do it happily and you don't have to change anything. But maybe some other people need a wake-up call because they are feeling pressured into doing something that's going to harm their self-esteem, their ability to assess their own work, and in the end, their writing. I know that if I tried to measure my success by word counts, that's exactly what would happen. It would harm my self-esteem. It would definitely harm the quality of my writing. So if you have the slightest suspicion that you might be like me, then stick around for a few more minutes. To start with, let's try to analyze why this is even such a big thing. Well, being a writer is hard, you guys. And you notice that I didn't say writing is hard. It can be, but usually the writing part is actually the easier part, but being a writer is hard. Why? Well, because writing isn't maths. Writing, like any other art form, is inherently somewhat subjective, which makes measuring success extremely complicated. And it's also often quite uncomfortable when you have to try to explain to your friends or other people what you're doing with your life. How do you know that you're successful? How do you convince other people that you're successful? Unless you're like a famous writer, how do you do that? Well, you could try to put it into terms that everyone, including you, understands. So you try to put a number to it. And if you can't use the number of books that you've sold, because either you are not published yet, or maybe you do have a book out, but it's not selling amazingly well, so it would make you feel like crap if you use that as a measure of success, then you can try to use word counts. So what's the issue with this? Well, stay with me here. So, I have a step counter thing on my phone. I like it. It gets me moving, and every time I hit my steps goal for the day, I get applause and confetti on the screen, and it's incredible how the human brain works and how upset I would be if I didn't get my confetti for the day. I'm a neuroendocrinologist by education, so I know exactly what my brain is doing. It's that burst of reward hormones that you get that is so addictive. But I am always aware of what that step counter is actually measuring. It's measuring the number of steps I take, and it's estimating the number of calories that I burn. It doesn't tell me anything about how elegant my walk is or whether the place I went to was worth going to. If I was trying to learn to dance, I wouldn't use a step counter as my measure of success in dancing, because that doesn't make any sense, does it? And I also check my word count goal. Of course I do. And I'm happy when I've written a lot of words in a day. But I am always aware that my goal is not in the end to write X words. It is to tell an interesting story and to tell it well. I know I'm not telling you anything new by saying that word count does not necessarily equal productivity. You probably already know that, but do you? Do you really? Maybe sometimes we all need to hear things from the mouth of somebody else. So here it is. Word count does not always equal productivity. 5 good sentences are usually better than 10,000 words that are pure rubbish. I hear a lot of people complain that they find revising difficult, or they don't enjoy it, or they can't go back to their first drafts. And I'm going to suggest a possible explanation for that in some cases. It may not apply to you at all. It will only apply to some people, probably people whose brains work a little bit like mine, because obviously I'm just using my own experience. But I love revising and editing. I really enjoy it. I find it more fun than the initial writing of a first draft. I find it fairly easy. It's just great. I love it. And a lot of people ask me, how? Why? How do you do that? One of the answers is people are different and they have different strengths and talents, and sometimes that's just how it is. But maybe potentially, in some cases, there's something else to it as well. Is it possible that you don't want to go back to your first draft, or you find it difficult to revise because that first draft is actually kind of rubbish? And is it possible that it isn't rubbish because you're a bad, talentless writer? It's just rubbish because it was rushed, and it was rushed because you were following a rule that told you to never edit as you went along. So now you have a whole bunch of words that are badly written and they're not actually fun to read. If they are not fun and if they are difficult to read, of course you don't want to go back and revise them. You have to enjoy your own writing. Sometimes that's the only thing that can keep you going. If you quick draft too much and you leave too much work for the revising stage, then that's your choice. It's not wrong, but here's the danger. Once you get to the revising stage, the idea is no longer fresh. Some of the magic and the enthusiasm that came along with that story is already gone because you already know what happens. You've worked out most of the major plot points. You're kind of spent. You're kind of over that story a little bit. And if what you're reading isn't inspiring you again, just like it would if you were reading somebody else's novel that was really good and it makes you want to write, then it's difficult to get back into it. There's little novelty left, there's little surprise left, there's little inspiration left some of the time, but there is so much work left and you just don't want to do it because it feels like a chore. It's almost like having a premature baby. It didn't have the time to develop naturally in a natural time frame, and now that it's born, it has so many problems and it needs so much extra care, and everything might still be all right in the end, and you may end up with a beautiful, healthy child, but why do that to yourself if you can avoid it? This is why I think that not everyone, but many writers, including myself, need to pace ourselves and kind of just stop and smell the roses. Let your story breathe. Let every sentence form in your head fully and wait to see where it wants to take you. Writing is more thinking than typing. Here's what me writing a novel looks like, and see if you can relate at all. The first few chapters of my novels are the most rewritten things ever. Do not let anybody tell you that rewriting chapter 1 multiple times is a universally bad strategy. You should never ever do it, and you will never ever finish a first draft if you do that. That is not true. That's just one of those writing myths that gets propagated, just like the idea that it's a rule set in stone, that it doesn't matter if you know that what you're putting on the page is pure crap. You should always keep going instead of stopping to edit. The bottom line is, some things work for some people and other things work for other people. The reason I rewrite the beginnings of novels so much is because it's a necessity for me to be inspired by my own writing. Before I write chapter 2, I quickly reread chapter 1, and I have to be able to say, yes, this is good, this is solid, I know exactly where it's taking me, and I'm excited about continuing. I am very annoyed by bad style and badly put together sentences as a reader. So if I see that in my own writing when it's the early stages of a novel, I have to stop and fix it, because otherwise it's going to make it very difficult for me to go back and reread and enjoy revising. Sometimes a good turn of phrase or just the right word can even inspire your story to go in a different, more interesting direction. There's a joy in language, but often finding the right language takes a little bit of time. Not always, not always. Sometimes you're just very inspired and the words just flow from your fingertips, and sometimes even I end up with huge word count goals. But other times you have to just sit with it for a minute and think about it and let your brain figure it out. Let me be absolutely clear, by no means am I saying that every sentence I write is perfect or even very good the first time I write it. Absolutely not. But I always measure my success by whether I am able to solve the next issue with the story, whatever that issue may be, rather than how many words I put on the page that day. If I spend 3 days just staring at a certain plot point that doesn't work and finally figuring it out and putting one sentence on the page that fixes everything, then that's 3 days well spent and that sentence is golden. It's difficult, but you have to develop your personal radar for whether you've done well or not in a certain situation. With all of that said, there are situations when just sitting down and writing, even if it's crap, without stopping to edit, just sitting and writing can be helpful. Notably, I used that sort of technique when I was trying to get back into writing after a very long period of time when I hadn't been writing, and I was just trying to get the habit back. So then sometimes I would just have a mental block, so I would say to myself, okay, just sit down and write. It doesn't matter if it's rubbish. So that's an exercise for me. But the words that I type during such exercises most of the time are rubbish and they are useless as actual writing. I'm not going to put them into anything, or they would need so much revising in order to use them. They usually end up in the waste bin, and then once I'm back into the habit, I settle down and I work on my actual real projects. Another situation in which I write without stopping to edit, and it's sometimes crap, is in the final chapters of a novel. But by that point, I have figured out the characters and the voices and the major plot points. I can see the end. It's very close. I no longer need the reassurance that my foundation is solid and that the writing is good. So then I can allow my style to lapse, and in that final sprint I can just throw words out there and hope to fix it later. But A novel is a marathon and nobody sprints a marathon. And a few chapters at the end that need a whole lot of fixing is not the same as an entire first draft needing a whole lot of fixing. The bottom line is, I'm not saying that I won't do writing challenges or writing sprints. I probably will, but I will do them because they are fun and not necessarily because they measure my success or even because they will always help my writing, because they might not. I intend to use them sparingly and with caution, and if you're like me, I advise you to do the same, and always remember, you are a writer, not a typist.